And it's because of these things that I think that this franchise just needs to go away. It's had its run. Like, the movie overall was just, it was adequate. It was mildly entertaining, but it's trying to relive the glory days of the past. Welcome everyone to the review of Bad Boys Ride or Die. We're going to walk through the good, the bad, and the ugly of this movie, and I'm going to let you know why I think that this movie franchise should finally come to an end. So let's get to it. The good things about this movie are there was a lot of really, really funny jokes. Part of the reason for that was the fact that Will Smith and Martin Lawrence had great chemistry. And that was my second point on the good things. Their chemistry in this movie was absolutely phenomenal. They worked so well together. And not only just the two of them working well together, the ensemble around them, their team that they work with has great chemistry. Parts of the family members, which we see a little bit of in this movie, have great chemistry. And because of that, a lot of parts of this movie just feel natural. And because they feel natural, the jokes are awesome. They land, they feel good, but not all the jokes were good. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes. The third aspect that I thought was really good about this movie is the action sequences. There was a lot of really, really good action sequences. They were fast paced. They didn't just linger. They kind of went, they had some interesting and new types of camera shots for these action sequences. And it really made for an exciting and engaging time watching these sequences. And so those are the things that I thought really did well for this movie. The chemistry, the jokes, and the action sequences. Before we get to the bad and the ugly, like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. Let's continue. Now for the bad. And for the bad, this movie had a very uninspiring plot. They tried to connect this movie to the previous movie, and in doing so, they took a very small part of the last movie and tried to turn it into a bigger plot point. But if it really was a bigger plot point, it would have played out in the previous movie. So the fact that it didn't play out in that movie, but now all of a sudden it's playing out in this movie, kind of just doesn't make sense. So because of that, it just was uninspiring. It didn't feel like it didn't grip you. It didn't make you want to like sit on the edge of your seat, wondering what's going to happen next. Like, it doesn't draw you in. You're just kind of like, it's there. This is happening, whatever. It is what it is. The second point that I think is bad about this movie is that it just has a lame villain. There's no real backstory for this villain. There's a little bit, but the backstory that they give, they point it in one direction saying that this is how it connects. But then everything that they explain is in another direction that has nothing to do with the first direction. So it just doesn't really make sense. This character doesn't really have a tie to the plot and the storyline that they're trying to tell. So it's just lame. And the villain is not in the movie a lot, which doesn't help when you're not really connecting the villain to the plot line and why he's actually doing the things that he's doing. And then the villain's not on screen. It just makes for bad storytelling. And I think this bad villain, uninspiring plot really, really hurt this movie. And now we're going to get to the ugly. The ugly part of this movie is that because it had an uninspiring plot and a bad villain, there were a lot of times in this movie that just felt awkward, like they didn't know what to say or what to do in certain scenes, so they just tried to fill it with jokes. And many of those jokes just really, to me, fell super flat. And the reason that these jokes fell flat was because they came from a point of just bad storytelling. Like, they weren't like the good jokes that came from really good chemistry and there was a good natural connection between the characters and it's just a natural play out of the jokes that were there. They just seemed to flow naturally. Where these jokes, they didn't seem natural. It just seemed weird, just seemed awkward. It's like they didn't know what to say or do, so they just tried to insert a joke. The best way that I could describe this is this: have you ever been to some type of event where it was a very awkward event where you didn't necessarily know what to say or what to do or who you're talking to, or whatever. And to try to lighten the mood or try to break the ice, you just start cracking jokes, but they're just not falling, and they're just falling flat because it's an awkward situation and people aren't into it. And it's just a lot of awkwardness. That's what's happening in a good chunk of this movie, unfortunately. And that's the thing that really, really brings this movie down, is that because of the uninspiring plot and bad storytelling, they had all these gaps in this movie where they didn't know what to really say or what to do. And they tried to fill it with jokes that just weren't natural, and they just fell flat. The actors gave it their best and all that, and I commend them, but it just was lame. If they would have just stuck to the jokes that come naturally, and if they would have just written a better story, I think this movie could have been well. But because they didn't do those things, they made this movie kind of bad overall. Like it really took me out of the movie. I rolled my eyes many times, and it's because of these things that I think that this franchise just needs to go away. It's had its run. Like the movie overall was just, it was adequate. It was mildly entertaining, but it's trying to relive the glory days of the past. And we've seen plenty of franchises who have tried to relive the glory days of the past and have just fallen flat on their face. Indiana Jones. But I don't want to see that happen to this franchise. I don't think this entry was that bad. It's heading in a bad direction. And because of that, I think that they just need to stop the franchise here before it just gets really, really, really ugly. And you put out a bad movie like Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls. Like, ugh. So I don't want to see it get to that point. And because of that, I think this franchise should just end where it is. It was a good ending. They can leave it here. The actors are getting old. They really can't be doing this type of action work anymore and be realistic. So I think it's a great place for them to end it without embarrassing themselves really bad in the future. Overall, I would give this movie 5 out of 10. It was mildly entertaining. It had some good points to it. It had some bad points to it that were about 50-50. So that's why I give it a 5 out of 10. What did you think of this movie? Did you rate it the same as I did, a 5 out of 10? Were you higher? Were you lower? Do you think that this franchise should continue on with another movie? Do you think it should end right now where it is? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions. And since you're already here, why don't you go watch this video right here of another review. Until next time, everyone, see ya. What are we doing? Why? Why?